Hey guys, welcome. My name is Debbie. Welcome to my channel. We are on day 18 of the Karen Reed retrial, and it just dawned on me that I think I am the only one calling it the boyfriend cop murder trial. And the reason for that is because that's what the first trial was called. I think a lot of people are just calling it the Karen Reed retrial, and some places are calling it killer or cover up or something like that. But so if any of you were wondering, that's why I'm calling it the boyfriend cop murder trials, because that's what the original trial was called. And lo and behold, Nancy's gonna come kidnap me and take me to Disney because I need a vacation. Okay, Judy. Aperture science, our process is fact driven. While this science is still driven by physical evidence found on a vehicle or road surface. Experts stay at the forefront of gathering and evaluating passenger car and commercial vehicular download data. Personal device data, video images, fleet and driver tracking software to stay current with today's ever-changing and ever-growing list of digital data sources. Jill got lost in the portal again. Jill! Follow the sound of my voice. Hey, Carla. Hey, Terry. Jill, follow the sound of my voice. I guess we lost Jill. Okay. Also, oh yay, we get loudly first thing in the morning. I hope everybody has plenty of coffee. Oh, okay, Jill. I was worried about you. Okay. Now I'm afraid to go on a cruise. My high school cruise was nice. It was an idea because we were kids. So we were in like the cheapest room. Like you can't even call it a stateroom because it was probably worse or as bad as crew quarters. Like there were 2 bunk beds. I mean like 4 beds, like 2 bunk beds. I don't even remember where the toilet was. But like there wasn't even hardly room to walk. It was like door, bathroom, bunk beds. It was like a closet. And you were under the water level. So it was like constant. Like you slept really good though, because you got rocked to sleep. And then they feed you 24/7 on a cruise ship. Like 24/7. You've got the 3 scheduled meals and then you got buffets in between the meals. So we're off in the Bahamas, playing, doing whatever, and we get back to the ship in between feeding times, which is very rare. We're starving. So some nice man that worked on the ship went to the kitchen and made us sandwiches. And he goes, I'm not supposed to do this, but I'll do it for you. So Travis really wants to go on one. I doubt, and as an adult, we'll get any special treatment like that. That guy was so nice. Yeah, Judy caught you know what? Get those seasick bands. They work. But you know what though, with a cruise, now I sometimes have trouble in a boat. Actually, I think I've outgrown it, but when I was a teenager, my uncle both sides of the family, because up here we're on the Swanee River. In the Keys, of course, the Keys. So I've been on boats forever, like pretty much my whole life. And about the time I was a teenager, I started getting motion sickness. So either way, and I would get motion sickness on the boats. And I got those. They originally were made for pregnant people. I'm so sorry. I did not mean that. Pregnant women. Pregnant women. The seasick bracelets, they have like a little button thing right there that presses that pressure point that keeps you from being nauseous. And they work really well. When I had, which surgery was it? My back surgery, I think. I got super, super motion sickness in the car. It was only while my back was screwed up. I don't understand it. And every time my dad would drive me to my appointments, because it was so bad I couldn't even drive, he'd drive me to my appointments, and I would have to wear those because I got so sick. And we were afraid the anesthesia was going to make me sick. So I asked the anesthesiologist. Well, actually, I think he asked me what I was doing for the nausea, and I told him, I said, but I can't wear them during the surgery. He goes, why not? We're not doing surgery on your wrists. We're doing surgery on your back. I was like, I can wear them? He's like, yeah, you can wear them. I was like, yay. So I wore them during my back surgery, and I didn't get sick or anything afterwards from the anesthesia or the pain medicine. And I was like, yes, that's wonderful. Oh, you have many ears? Ah. Oh, I am so sorry. See, that would not be compatible with my life because I love roller coasters and stuff like that. That would not. And I love water. I love boats. I love being on the water. I love swim. I like water. If I had to separate from water or roller coasters, my life would be done. I would take me home, Lord. I'm done here now. I know. That's why I said not people, women. And we're not having that discussion right now. Okay. I said we're not having that discussion.
Step up, face the court, and raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Tallali, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name?
Yep, my name is Nick Bradford, Bradford.
What do you do for work, sir?
I'm a DNA expert for Bodie Technology
And where is Bodie Technology located?
in Lorton, Virginia.
And where did you go to school, sir?
I went to school at Mercyhurst College in Erie, Pennsylvania for a bachelor in forensic biology and a master's in forensic molecular biology from the George Washington University in Washington, D.C.
And following your education, where did you go to work?
I started at Bodie in about 2009.
And so did you work at Bodie prior to your graduation?
Yes.
And how long have you worked there at Bodie?
Since then, I spent 2 years at the Pennsylvania State Police at about 2021.
And when you joined Bodie Technologies, what was your position and title that you were initially hired for?
I was initially a DNA technician.
And when did you become an analyst?
In 2014.
And what is the difference between a technician and an analyst?
The technicians operate the robotic equipment in the labs and assist with paperwork and various reagent duties and things like that.
And what does an analyst do?
An analyst analyzes the DNA evidence that's submitted from various police agencies from around the country. We come to court to testify and do statistical analysis of any comparisons that we might do.
Now, if you could, sir, please describe for the jury the training that you underwent initially as a technician.
As a technician, it was probably a few, maybe 2 or 3 month training process that involved various reading of the manuals for the robotics and various written and verbal exams.
Now, is there a continuing educational component at Bodie?
Yes, for DNA analysts, we have proficiency testing twice a year. We have to do a certain number of hours of continuing education. So that would be things like conferences, things like that. And we have to do scientific literature reviews. So we have to keep up with the scientific articles 4 times a year.
Now, if you could just expound a little as far as what exactly does that continuing educational component consist of as far as the conferences and scientific literature review? What specific areas are you reviewing and going to conferences on?
Yeah, so that would be areas specific to forensic DNA testing.
Now, how many analysts work at Bodie?
Somewhere between 60 and 75, maybe.
If you could, please describe for the jury what kind of lab Bodie is.
So Bodie is a private DNA lab, and we take casework from various police agencies across the country, and we also have groups that work on international cases and things like that.
Now, you mentioned some of your work, bless you, is submitted from law enforcement agencies around the country. Is that the entirety of the work, or where does some of the other pieces come from?
Yeah, so like I said, some of it is international, and then we also do some research work as well.
Now, what type of analysis do you currently perform at Bodie?
So I'm part of the customized casework group. So we take generally one-off cases or smaller, more complex cases, and then we work through those.
Now, specifically with reference to DNA analysis, can you explain to the jury first in sort of general terms, how is that analysis performed?
Yes, so for DNA analysis, what we're trying to do is obtain a DNA profile from a piece of evidence and then potentially compare that with a reference sample from a known individual.
Now, is the Bodie lab accredited?
Yes.
And by whom is it accredited?
Through the National Institute of Standards.
Now, within the Bodie lab, are there certain steps that are taken to prevent against contamination?
Yes. So at every step of the testing process, we have positive and negative controls. The evidence room is a secure room, so only a handful of people have access to that room. And then everything that we would need to test, we would sign out, and that would be recorded on the chain of custody. The building itself is secure, so you need to swipe your badge to sign in. We wear protective equipment through all parts of the process. So we have gloves, goggles, lab coat, hair nets, masks. And during, after we write the reports, all of our results are reviewed prior to being reported.
Now, to that point, sir, is there a review process that your work and any analyst work undergoes at the Bodie labs?
Yes. So the final step would be a technical and an administrative review.
Now, can you describe that process as far as the technical review and review in general at Bodie?
Yes. So we submit the case file with a report and all of our conclusions. And then another analyst goes through everything and makes sure that they agree with everything that we submitted.
I think you made reference to this a little earlier in your testimony, but as part of the accreditation process, do you undergo proficiency testing?
Yes, twice a year.
And can you explain to the jury that proficiency testing process?
Yes. So twice a year, we get what's essentially a mock case submitted from an outside vendor that we treat as if it were an actual case. We go through and do all the testing that we would normally do, and then submit that back to the vendor, and they compare the results to the known results of what they should be.
Now, what areas have you specifically undergone proficiency testing in?
So everything that I am trained and signed off in.
In DNA specifically, is that correct?
Yes.
And have you successfully completed each of those proficiency tests that you've taken?
Yes.
Now, you made reference to this a little earlier, but can you explain to the jury what are positive and negative controls?
Right. So positive controls we use to make sure that the various testing steps that we're performing are working as we expect. So if we have a positive control, we would expect to see the DNA profile that we intend to see in that positive sample. Negative samples we use to make sure that there aren't any sources of contamination along the way. The chemicals that we're using aren't potentially contaminated, or that maybe samples were switched or something along the way.
Now, when you were assigned work within the DNA unit at Bodie Technologies, where do you retrieve that item, or where do you retrieve those items physically from?
Yes, so those would be delivered to our secure evidence room, and then any testing performed, we would need to sign that out, and that would be recorded on the chain of custody.
Now, the secure evidence room, is that temperature controlled at all?
Yes, we have just basic climate control as well as freezers and refrigerators.
And the freezers, refrigerators are commonly referred to as cold storage. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, why is items of evidence stored in cold storage?
Certain items of evidence are stored cold because things like heat, UV light, and moisture can cause microbial activity or degrade the DNA. So we would not get the highest quality results that we would want.
Now, when you retrieve items from the cold storage or from the secured evidence room, how are those items packaged when you receive them for DNA testing?
So they're usually, however they're packed from, like, for example, the police agency that sends it to us, they'll pack them according to their guidelines and standards, and then they're sent to us and we store them in the freezer. And then when they're signed out on our end, we just have a basic container that we put them in to keep the case together.
Now, sir, what is DNA?
So DNA is basically the manual for a living organism. Most of the DNA is contained within the nucleus of every cell, or pretty much every cell. And it contains all the information that is needed to make an individual.
Now, is DNA the same in every cell of a person's body?
Yes.
And how many steps are included in DNA testing?
So forensic DNA testing, the testing that we did, there are basically 4 steps. So there's DNA extraction, quantification, amplification, and profile detection.
Now, can you describe for the jury what each of those steps are and sort of what they entail?
Yes. So DNA extraction is we are basically trying to separate out the DNA from everything else. So all the other parts of the cell or any other material that might be part of the evidence. So we're left with just the DNA. Next is quantification. And we're trying to figure out how much DNA we have to work with. The steps further down the line are calibrated to a certain amount of DNA input. If we add too much DNA, it can cause problems. So we need to know how much we have to work with. And then the next step is amplification. So this is when we take 20 to 25 different locations within the genome that we're interested in looking at, and we make millions and millions of copies of each of those locations. And in each one of those copies, there's a fluorescent tag that's embedded into each one. So then that leads to the final step of profile detection, where we separate those fragments out by size, and that fluorescent tag allows us to identify those particular locations.
Now, sir, in January of 2024, were you assigned to perform some work on a lab case number, your Bodie lab case number, CCA 2416-0023, pertaining to this defendant, Karen Reed?
Yes.
Now, you received those items for testing from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, correct?
Correct.
Now, do you also, when you receive items from an outside agency, do you also receive a corresponding submitting agency case number from that agency?
Yes.
And in this case, that was Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, lab number 22-02184. Is that correct?
Correct.
Now, what type of work were you assigned to do in this case?
So in this case, I was assigned to look at an extract that was submitted from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab, as well as a hair, and then 2 reference samples that were also submitted.
Now, could you explain to the jury the process that you used to analyze, in general terms, evidence in this case?
Yes. So generally, we follow that same process, with the exception of the extract that was submitted. Since the extraction process was already completed, we did not need to do that, and we could move straight to quantification. And then we did the entire process for the hair as well as the reference.
Now, you made brief reference to it a moment before, but was there a known standard that was done in this case?
Yes.
And did another analyst test and report the results from the known blood standard of John O'Keefe?
Correct.
And how was that done?
Yes. So the entirety of the testing was performed at the state lab, and they submitted the final profile to us for comparison.
Now, what is a DNA profile?
So a DNA profile is basically just a list of all the variants at those 24 or 25 different locations that we're interested in. And the entirety of those different variations are what makes a DNA profile individual or unique.
Now, as far as when you're looking or analyzing or examining a DNA profile, can you describe for the jury, what does it look like? What are you looking at?
So when we're looking at a DNA profile, it's essentially a graph with a series of peaks across the horizontal axis. And those correspond to the length of the DNA fragments that we amplified. And those are assigned a number based on the length of that fragment. And those numbers are what we refer to as the alleles. And those numbers are assembled into essentially a chart, and that's the DNA profile.
Now, could you please describe to the jury the process of comparison between a known standard and an evidence sample?
Yes. So when we have an evidence sample, we need to compare it to a reference sample. And then, so what we do is we take those 2 tables that I mentioned, one from the evidence sample and one from the reference sample, and we put them next to each other and do a comparison to see if the reference profile is potentially part of the evidence profile. And then if the 2 are consistent, then we would need to do a statistical calculation to determine the strength of, for example, if 1 in every 3 people would be a potential match, then that's not very strong. So we need to we have to have some sort of mathematical weight to describe the potential match.
Now, if you could again, sir, explain to the jury, what was your role in the testing in this case?
Yes. So my role was to analyze the DNA profiles and then do the comparisons.
Now, what items specifically did you receive for DNA testing in this case?
So yes, like I mentioned, we received the hair, we received the 2 reference samples, we received an extract from a taillight, as well as the negative control that was associated with that. And then we also received a reference profile from the state lab.
Now, starting with what your lab has labeled as EO2, that has a corresponding State Police Crime Lab item number 3-1.1. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the description of that item, EO2 3-1.1?
So that was the extract of the sample from the passenger side taillight of a vehicle.
And was there any further description or of that vehicle as far as the plate number?
Yes, there was a plate number.
Okay. And do you recall what the plate number was?
So that would be 3GC684.
And did you receive 2 buckle samples identified as RO3 and RO4?
Yes.
And what was RO3 identified as?
So that was a buccal swab from Yuri Begedic.
And what was RO4 identified as?
So that was a buccal swab from Michael Proctor.
It's buccal.
And then that extract portion, that was the part that was labeled as EO2. Is that correct?
Say it right. Buccal.
And can you please explain to the jury what an extract is?
So like I mentioned, an extract is DNA that was extracted from the evidence sample.
Now, the known standard of Mr. John O'Keefe, that had an item number as well. Is that correct?
Yes.
And what was that item number first from the State Police, Massachusetts State Police Crime Lab?
So that was 8-1.1.1.
And did your lab, Bodie Technologies, have a corresponding item number associated with that known standard?
No, we just used the Massachusetts lab number for that.
And that known standard from John O'Keefe, did that appear to be a standard single source profile?
Yes.
And what is a single source profile?
So a single source profile is essentially a DNA profile from one individual, as opposed to a DNA profile that could be a mixture of multiple individuals.
Now, what does STR stand for?
Stands for short tandem repeat.
And can you please describe that short tandem repeat process for the jury?
Yes. So like I mentioned, what we're doing with STR, short tandem repeat testing, is we're amplifying a number of locations in the genome, and then we're separating them out by size. Now, the reason we do that is because at the at the DNA level, those regions of the genome have a series of genetic base pairs that repeats over and over again in sequence. So they're short tandem repeated DNA sequences. And the number of times that sequence repeats at that location is what we call the allele. So if the sequence repeated 5 times, we would call that allele 5. And that the summation of all those alleles is what makes the DNA profile.
And what is an STR mix?
So are you referring to the computer program, StarMix?
Yes, STAR mix, excuse me.
Yes. Okay. Yes. So when we're dealing with mixture profiles, so that would be DNA evidence profiles where more than one person's DNA is all mixed together. We need to be able to try to separate that out as best we can. We use a computer program called STRMix or StarMix, and that uses various mathematical calculations that allow us to make the best use of that mixture data that we can. And it allows us to run those statistical calculations to reference profiles as well.
Now, item EO2 from the passenger side taillight of the vehicle. What did you conclude as to that profile?
Yeah, so that was a mixture of individuals, including at least one male.
Now, if you could, please sort of walk the jury through that process in making a profile comparison from the profile from the passenger side taillight of the defendant's vehicle and your other submitted samples.
Yes. So when we're using StarMix and we're doing a comparison, we have the StarMix output. And essentially what that's doing is we input, based on the DNA profile that we observe, the number of contributors that we would expect to be there. So in this case, we would say there were 3 individuals. So the StarMix software will break out those 3 different components and give probabilities to each different allele combination. So we would take the reference profile and then compare that to the output from the StarMix program to see if there's a potential inclusion.
Now, you mentioned a little bit about statistical calculations. How are those statistical calculations done?
Yes. So once we determine that there's a potential inclusion in the mixture, we will run what's called a likelihood ratio. So essentially what we're doing there is we're doing a likelihood ratio is we're comparing 2 different explanations for the evidence profile that we obtained. So one of those explanations would be that in this case, the DNA profile is a mixture of one of those reference samples that we're comparing and 2 unknown unrelated individuals. The other explanation would be that it was 3 unknown unrelated individuals. So we compare those 2 and we determine the ratio of which one is more likely.
And where do those statistical numbers or calculations, where do they come from?
So they're all based in the fact that we know how common the different alleles at each location are within the population. So we can do a lot of mathematics and figure out how rare or common different alleles might be.
Now, sir, in your comparison analysis between the taillight sample and the known standard from John O'Keefe, what conclusions did you make from your analysis or comparative analysis between those two?
Between John O'Keefe and the mixture profile, John O'Keefe could not be excluded as a potential contributor to that mixture profile.
And as far as the statistical analysis, what, if anything, did you find with reference to that?
Yes, so we did, like I mentioned, that likelihood ratio, and in the case of it being a mixture of John O'Keefe and two unknown unrelated individuals, it would be 740 nonillion times more likely that it was a mixture of John O'Keefe and two unrelated individuals versus three unknown unrelated individuals.
Now, that number that you just referenced, as far as 740 nonillion times more likely, how many zeros are in the nonillion?
Nonillion is 30 zeros.
Now, this analysis supported a strong support for inclusion, correct?
Correct.
Now, can you explain to the jury what that means as far as a strong support for inclusion?
Yes, so we have a chart that based on the likelihood ratio, so that 749 million number, based on the different numbers that we might get, we assign a verbal qualifier to that just to make it a little bit more user-friendly. So in this case, it would technically be very strong support for inclusion.
Now, in your comparison analysis between the taillight sample and the known standard from Yuri Buchanan, what conclusions did you make from your analysis of those?
So he could not be visually excluded based on just comparing the profile to the StarMix output. So we do the likelihood ratio to determine that, like I said, that likelihood ratio. So in this case, it was 46 million times more likely that it was three unknown unrelated individuals versus Yuri Buchanan and two unknown unrelated individuals. So that would be very strong support for exclusion.
And again, sir, if you could just expound a little, when you say very strong support for exclusion, what does that mean?
Again, we're just referring back to the verbal scale that we have as part of our reporting guidelines.
Now, in your comparison analysis between the taillight sample and the known standard from Michael Proctor, what conclusions did you make from your analysis there?
Yes, so he could not be visually excluded, again, based on that initial comparison. So we run the statistic, and it was 76,000 times more likely that it was three unknown unrelated individuals versus Michael Proctor and two unknown unrelated individuals. And that would be strong support for exclusion.
So with reference to the comparative analysis between Trooper Proctor's DNA sample and the taillight sample, that was a strong support for exclusion, correct?
Correct.
Now, turning your attention to what your lab has labeled as EO1, that has a corresponding Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory item number of 3-6.1. Is that correct?
Correct.
And what was the description that was provided by the external submitting agency as far as that item?
So that was the shaft end of a hair from the exterior passenger side rear panel of that same plate number.
Now, as far as that, and I understand that your lab didn't do it, but you're familiar with the process as far as extracting a DNA profile from a hair, correct?
Yes.
Can you explain that process to the jury?
Yes. So during the extraction process, we dissolve the hair and then we attempt to do our normal DNA processing.
Now, what is different, if anything, in DNA testing when it comes to hair?
So hair, generally, if it's the hair shaft only, we would not expect to get great STR results. However, it is possible. So we usually attempt that first.
Now, are you familiar with the term follicular tissue?
Yes.
And can you please explain to the jury what that is?
Yes, so that would be the hair follicle, and in the hair follicle, we would expect to find a lot of nuclear DNA. So that would be DNA from the nucleus of cells.
You mentioned there any sort of piece of hair. There's a root end and a shaft end, correct?
Correct.
And can you, probably pretty well understood, but could you please explain to the jury the difference between the two?
Yes. So the root end would be the end that we would expect to find the root or the follicle, and then the shaft end would be just the shaft of the hair itself.
Now, what is autosomal DNA testing?
Yes. So autosomal DNA test. So autosomal DNA is the DNA that from mother and father that's combined in the child. So that would be opposed to DNA that's inherited directly from a single parent. So that would be something like Y chromosome DNA that would be inherited directly from the father. So all the sons of a father would have the same Y profile. Also, there's mitochondrial DNA. So the mitochondria exist outside the nucleus of the cell, and that is inherited directly from the mother. So all of a mother's children would have the same mitochondrial profile.
Now, sir, from your analysis, what were your conclusions for the hair, EO1, in your autosomal or STR testing?
Yes. So we performed the extraction and then the quantification, and the quantification results were below the limit of detection. So we would not expect to get an STR profile from that hair.
And if you could expound just a bit as far as that term below the limit of detection, what exactly does that mean?
Yes. So during the quantification process, our instruments are calibrated as part of our internal validations to detect a certain amount of DNA. And once we get below that amount of DNA, it's determined, we call that undetermined. So that would be below the instrument's limit of detection. And based on those validations, we would not expect to get a profile from that.
And so what happened with the hair extraction sample in your lab at Bodie from there once you had completed the STR testing?
Yes. So like I said, it's not unexpected that the shaft of a hair would not give us STR results. So we often transfer those to the mitochondrial group that does the mitochondrial DNA testing.
And why is that transferred from you to another analyst within the lab?
I'm not personally signed off in mitochondria. We don't do quite enough testing to have everyone signed off in all the different technologies.
Thank you very much. I have no further questions.
All right. Mr. Jackson?
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. A couple of quick questions. You mentioned, Mr. Bradford, a quantification related to both urobutynic and a known sample from former trooper Michael Proctor. Can we go over? I'm going to ask you about the sample related to Michael Proctor. I think I heard you say 1 in 76,000, correct?
Yes.
Describe that one more time for the jurors. When you quantify that profile as it compares to the population of the Earth, for instance, what does that mean? What's the significance of 1 in 76,000?
Yes. So you need to be very careful when we're talking about statistics, because if we start to introduce different analogies to try to describe them, they start to go off the rails, and we're describing things that are not actually described in the statistic. So it makes a lot of sense to compare that to the population of the Earth, for example. However, what we're talking about here are the relative likelihoods of those two different explanations of the evidence profile. So like I said, in this case, it's 76,000 times more likely that we would observe that evidence profile if it were 3 unknown, unrelated individuals, as opposed to Michael Proctor and then 2 unknown, unrelated individuals.
And sometimes, Mr. Bradford, we get numbers that are just sort of mind-boggling. You said 30 zeros. What is that number again?
Non-alien.
Non-alien?
Non-alien, yes.
Y'all literally in your job, like, almost have to make up new numbers. Non-alien, none of us have ever heard of that. That's 1 followed by 30 zeros, correct?
Correct.
As opposed to 76,000, which is 76 followed by 3 zeros.
Yes.
Much, much, much smaller number by factors of a non-alien, nearly, correct?
Correct.
So when you say that there is strong support for the exclusion of Michael Proctor in that DNA sample, you're not suggesting that he's completely excluded as a potential contributor.
Well, no. What I'm suggesting is what the numbers state, so
Right.
that it's 76,000 times more likely that it were 3 unknown or unrelated individuals versus Michael Proctor and 2 unknown unrelated individuals.
Understood. So you're not excluding him. You're simply saying statistically there's strong support for exclusion, but he's not excluded as a contributor. Is that right?
I am saying that there's strong support for exclusion, yes.
Understood. With regard to that taillight sample,
It confused the jury.
you were asked to compare known samples to that taillight sample, the known samples being State Trooper Yuri Buchanan and former Trooper Michael Proctor, those 2 known samples, correct?
Correct.
Were you asked to
Or
compare a known sample from a person by the name of Brian Higgins?
No.
Were you asked to compare a known sample from a person by the name of Brian Albert?
No.
Were you asked to compare a known sample from a person named Kevin Albert?
No.
Were you asked to compare a known sample from a person by the name of former Chief Kenneth Berkowitz?
No.
Thanks. Oh, I have that.
Okay, thank you. There's Mr. Lally, any follow-up?
No.
All right, you are all set. All set? Witness? Okay. There's-
now I keep hitting my head on my boom. I had to learn that the hard way. I was like, what is going on? I mean, wireless is amazing. Like the wireless technology, the Bluetooth technology, all that is amazing. But they need to tweak it. They need to combine wireless and AI to where it works perfectly together, because if you're trying to use like Bluetooth earbuds and you have like 3 or 4 things it can connect to, it needs to connect to the right thing. Likewise, your phone doesn't need to connect to every dang thing in the house. If you want to watch it on your phone, you should be able to watch it on your phone. It drives me crazy. I'm like, no.
Lily, your next witness, please.
Or if I want to watch or if I want to watch it on my phone, not my TV, like don't when I open my phone to scroll Facebook while the TV's on, don't switch it to my phone. Don't connect my phone to the TV. They're 2 separate things. If I want to do that, I will ask you to do it. I need some control over this AI stuff still. Make it work right, and then I'll love it. I'm not going to love AI until you make it work right.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing
And
but
it's
the
going
truth,
to
so help
take
you
over the
God?
world one day, just like Skynet. Science fiction is becoming science fact, and I'm not happy about it.
Go ahead, Mr. Lally.
Thank you, Your Honor.
My rant.
Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury, spelling your last name for the court?
Carl Miyasako, Miyasako.
And what do you do for work, sir?
I'm a senior DNA analyst at a forensic laboratory called Bodhi Technology,
And where is Bodhi Technologies located?
Lorton, Virginia.
And where did you go to school?
Virginia Commonwealth University.
And what degrees did you receive there?
I have a bachelor's of science in forensic science.
Now, following your education, where did you go to work?
Bodhi Technology.
And how long have you worked there?
I've been employed at that laboratory for over 11 years.
And when you joined Bodhi Technologies, what was your position and title that you were initially hired for?
Initially, I started off as a DNA technician.
And when did you become an analyst?
After a few years at the laboratory, I became a DNA analyst.
What is the difference at Bodhi Lab between a technician and an analyst?
Technician mainly does laboratory work, and an analyst is allowed to analyze data and write reports.
Now, could you please describe for the jury the training that you underwent initially as a technician?
So I observed people perform all the tasks that I was training in, and then I'm supervised performing tasks by a qualified individual, and then I do competency tests where I'm performing things independently.
Now, is there a continuing educational component of Bodhi?
Yes.
And could you please describe for the jury what that entails?
So continuing education just allows analysts or technicians to keep up to date with current topics within the community and future advancements in technologies.
Now, could you please describe for the jury what type of lab Bodhi is?
Bodhi is a private accredited forensic laboratory.
And where do your cases come from?
Our cases come from different agencies throughout the country, so law enforcement agencies, medical examiners, other laboratories as well.
And is that purely on a statewide basis, national basis, or something else?
National basis.
And what is the difference at Bodhi Lab or Bodhi Technologies between a DNA Analyst 1 and a DNA Analyst 2?
The type of caseload and different cases being assigned to these individuals.
Now, what is your current role at Bodhi Labs?
My current role is a senior DNA analyst.
And what is a senior DNA analyst, and what do you do in that role?
So senior analyst provides expertise or leadership in at least one discipline within the company. Senior analysts report challenging cases, are independent of other analysts, and also train other analysts as well.
Sir, I'm going to ask you to keep your voice up, please.
And sir, that microphone in front of you is adjustable. You can put it as close to yourself as you feel comfortable with. Thank you, Your Honor. Now, specifically with reference to DNA analysis, can you explain to the jury first in general terms how that analysis is performed at your lab?
Yeah, so it starts with receipt of evidence, and then it goes through the laboratory through different procedures up until we develop that DNA profile and it gets interpreted and analyzed.
Now, is the Bodhi Lab accredited?
Yes.
And by whom is it accredited?
We are accredited by a NSI National Accreditation Board.
Now, are there steps taken within your lab at Bodhi to prevent against contamination?
Yeah, we have protocols to monitor contamination and to also prevent contamination.
Now, also at the lab, is there a review process? And can you sort of describe your role as it applies as a senior DNA analyst to that review process?
Yeah, so all cases go through a review process. So after, let's say, the reporting analyst completes a case, it goes into submission for a technical review. So it's looked over to see if everything was done per protocol, if it's something that I or anyone else in the lab would have done, if any necessary processing steps were taken. Data is reviewed. If there was comparisons, that's something that a reviewing analyst would also do and see if they come to the same conclusions as the other analysts.
Now, just again, in general terms, can you explain to the jury just a little bit more in detail as far as the protocols that a technical review is concerned with, and sort of how a technical review is able to establish that the testing was done in comportment with that?
Yeah, so as me, if I were doing a technical review or look over the entire case file, did what processing steps happen were they per protocol? Is it's also something that I would have done in this case. If data is ultimately generated, I also do that comparison. Based on that comparison, what did I come to the conclusion to? Was that the same as the other analysts? Did we agree? Were stats done? Were they done the same way I would have done it? Essentially, conclusions would have to be in alignment between both analysts.
And so when you're doing a technical review, you're looking at or doing your own sort of comparisons, coming to your own conclusions, and running your own statistics. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm doing the comparisons myself and seeing if I also agree and come to the same conclusions.
Now, as part of the accreditation process, do you undergo any sort of proficiency testing?
We do.
And can you explain to the jury that proficiency testing process at Bodhi Technologies?
So an outside organization sends tests to our laboratory. Everyone participating in these proficiency testing completes their assignment. It gets submitted back to the organization, and they review the results to see if it matches up with the expected results on their end.
And how often do analysts at your lab undergo proficiency testing?
Twice a year.
Now, turning to you specifically, what areas do you specifically undergo proficiency testing in?
I do testing within short tandem repeats, STRs, YSTRs, mitochondrial DNA analysis.
And have you successfully completed each of those proficiency tests that you've taken?
I have.
Now, could you explain to the jury what are positive and negative controls, and so what is the difference between the two of those?
So throughout processing, we introduce controls such as a positive and negative control. Positive control is just a known template that we introduce during processing. It measures the efficacy of the testing and to see if we develop the known profile.
Ask every DNA expert that, Lally? Isn't that considered cumulative? Are we going to hear this every single time?
As it should have. Negative control, on the other hand, monitors for any type of contamination and cleanliness of reagents. And there's no DNA template introduced in this, so we don't expect data. So once that aligns with it, then we know that reagents used were good. Now,
sir, are you familiar with some mitochondrial DNA testing that was performed at Bodhi on lab case number CCA 2416-0023 pertaining to this defendant, Karen Reed?
Yes.
And the lab received those items for testing from the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, correct?
Correct.
And did you also, or do you also receive a corresponding agency case number from that or any submitting agency?
Yes.
And in this case was the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory, lab number 22-02184.
Yes.
And what type of work did Bodhi Labs do on CCA 2416-0023 with respect to mitochondrial DNA testing?
So we received 2 evidence items, a hair sample and a reference sample, and we were asked to type these for mitochondrial DNA.
Now, could you explain to the jury the process in general terms used to analyze that type of evidence?
So it's a similar process that you may have heard already for nuclear DNA or STRs. After DNA extraction, that's where we isolate and release DNA from the sample. It goes through amplification processing. This is where we employ the polymerase chain reaction or PCR technique. So we create numerous copies of targeted section within the DNA. This is just so we have enough DNA to generate a DNA profile. Following that, we do what's called quantification. So we determine a generated estimate of how much DNA is present within the sample. Following that, we do what's called sequencing. So we used a technique called Sanger sequencing. So bases within the sample, the order bases are determined, and bases are essentially building blocks of the DNA. So everyone has 4 bases in their DNA, and we refer to these bases to the letters A, G, T, and C. After sequencing, we go through what's called capillary electrophoresis. And so these bases are sequenced individually, and the data is interpreted.
Now, was there a known standard done in this case?
Yes.
And did another analyst test and report the results from the known blood standard from Mr. John O'Keefe?
What was that? Sorry.
Sure. Did another analyst test and report the results from the known blood standard from a Mr. John O'Keefe?
Yes.
And again, with reference to mitochondrial DNA testing, what items did the Bodie lab test for?
A hair shaft sample and the known DNA standard.
Now, can you please describe to the jury, again, in general terms, the process of comparison between a known standard and an evidence sample?
So we generate data from typically the evidence sample first, and then just to see that we get comparable data, and then we process the known reference standard. Then we look at the 2 DNA profiles of these different samples and we compare them. Based on the data, are we seeing that we can or cannot exclude the reference donor as being a source of the evidence sample?
What is autosomal DNA?
Autosomal DNA is like nuclear DNA. It's some additional STR short-handed repeats.
And what is mitochondrial DNA?
Mitochondrial DNA is a different type of DNA from nuclear DNA. Nuclear DNA, you get half of your DNA from your parents, so mom and dad, whereas mitochondrial DNA, it gets entirely inherited from mother to child.
What is the difference between the two as far as where it's located in reference to the nucleus of the cell?
So with STRs, there's basically 2 copies per cell, whereas with mitochondrial DNA, there are several copies per cell. So there's more abundance in mitochondrial DNA.
Now, how does that apply to an extract from a hair
Not
sample?
only have I just
So for hair samples,
not only have I just heard it, I heard it in high school biology. Can we move on, please? I know this. That's what they're thinking, Robbie. That's exactly what they're thinking.
we typically categorize these with like hairs with roots and rootless hair samples. So with hair samples, typically on the shaft end, there's more abundance of the mitochondrial DNA versus nuclear DNA, where nuclear DNA tends to be degraded or not present in high enough amounts.
What does PCR stand for?
PCR stands for polymerase chain reaction.
And can you please describe the PCR method to the jury?
Yeah, so that's the process where we create specific targeted sections of the DNA over and over. So we're replicating DNA using the source material as a template. This is because we want enough copies of that DNA to generate the end result of a DNA profile. So it'd be similar to, say, like a copy machine. You start with a single piece of paper and you make many, many copies from that piece of paper.
Now, sir, you alluded to it, I believe, earlier in your testimony, but just specifically as to this topic, what is DNA sequencing?
DNA sequencing is where we determine the order of bases within that sample.
And how is DNA sequencing used specifically in mitochondrial DNA testing?
So we use that to generate the sequence specific to that sample so that when we get the end result data, we compare it to a known standard or a common reference standard, and any differences from that common standard gets reported as that individual's mitochondrial profile.
Now, how is the testing different between autosomal versus mitochondrial DNA testing?
A lot of it does have some similarities, but the difference comes with STRs being more of a length fragment testing, and mitochondrial DNA is more of a base nucleotide DNA testing.
Now, as far as the running of the DNA, how is that sort of physically done, or what kind of tools are you using specific to mitochondrial DNA testing?
Yeah, so we use different instrumentation, such as like a thermocycler to do the PCR step. And then we also use what's called like a genetic analyzer at the end step of capillary electrophoresis.
Is there a certain type of gel that's used as far as visualization of that profile?
Yeah, so during the quantification step, we use what's called a yield gel, and we get a visual presentation of how much DNA is present within that sample.
When you say a visual presentation, like what type of instruments are you using to get that visualization?
So we use a gel and a UV light and a camera to capture essentially what we refer to as a band.
And what does that band look like?
It's generally, if there is presence of mitochondrial DNA within that sample, it emits a bright band on this gel. If there isn't anything, then we don't observe that band.
And what kind of instrumentation does your lab utilize in mitochondrial DNA testing?
We use a thermocycler or 3130 genetic analyzer as well.
Could you spell that, please?
The thermocycler, or THERMAL CYCLER.
And then what were the digits after it?
And then the genetic analyzer is a 3130 3130.
And if you could you please describe what those instruments do, or what they're used for specifically within the process of the mitochondrial DNA testing?
Yeah, so instruments is common within laboratories for automation purposes, so that thermocycler helps with the PCR stages, and then the genetic analyzer helps with the separation of the individual bases and then generating that end result data where the analyst will interpret the data.
Now, what is a D loop?
The D loop is the control region.
And how does that D loop factor into this type of analysis?
So with mitochondrial DNA analysis, we analyze certain regions within the D loop or the control region, and we refer to these as hypervariable regions. So HV1 and HV2.
And what does the D loop have to do with certain variabilities within the human population?
So this region is a non-coding region within the mitochondria, so it can allow for mutations because it wouldn't affect the mitochondria functions. Because of this highly variable difference within this region, it's useful for determining different maternal populations.
Now, did the Bodie lab also perform mitochondrial DNA testing on the known standard from John O'Keefe?
Yes.
And is that mitochondrial DNA testing the same for the known standard of John O'Keefe as it is, as you've been describing with reference to the evidence sample?
Yes.
And what is then done generally in the comparison of those two profiles?
So once we develop the profiles from these two separate sources, a comparison is done to each other, and we look at it to see if the profiles consistent, essentially matching with each other, and seeing if an exclusion or inclusion can be made.
And did you then perform your own comparative analysis of those two mitochondrial DNA profiles from the hair extracts from the rear panel of the defendant's vehicle and that of the known standard of Mr. O'Keefe?
I did.
And what is your opinion or conclusions that you arrived at from that comparative analysis?
Sustained.
Hold
Hold on. Ask it differently, Mr. Moore.
What conclusions did you come to from that comparative analysis between those two standards?
That John O'Keefe could not be excluded as being a source of the hair sample.
Now, can you expound a little as far as your conclusion is concerned? What does that mean?
Yeah, if I may refer to my report.
Yes.
So whenever we have a conclusion of a probable inclusion, like in this case where I could not exclude John O'Keefe as being a source of the hair sample, we do a statistical analysis to give weight to that.
Dang, Court TV, what is your deal?
Probable inclusion. So in this case, using a database and with 95% confidence, at least 99.895% of the population can be excluded as being a source of that hair sample.
And let me ask you just in general terms, that database you're using is referred to as MPOP, EMPOP, is that correct?
Correct.
And what is an MPOP?
So it's a searchable database where we search mitoprofiles in the database and essentially to see how common or rare that profile will be seen in the population. With MPOP in our laboratory, we search 3 main population groups within the United States: African American, Caucasian, Hispanic. And so the general goal is just to see how rare would that profile be within these populations.
And so what conclusions did you come to with reference to the consistency of the hair sample versus Mr. O'Keefe's sample in that MPOP database?
With 95% confidence, at least 99.895% of the population can be excluded as being a source of the hair sample.
Now, you made reference in your testimony a moment before about a confidence interval. What is that?
Yeah, so when we obtain statistical data, there's a confidence interval or upper limit. This is just like a range where the true value of said profile is, but we generally want to report like a conservative end to avoid any false inclusions. So it's at least 99.895% that the majority of the population can be excluded, but it could be higher, but at the lower end, it would be at least 99.895%.
And what confidence interval in your conclusion does this consistency between the hair sample profile from the rear quarter panel of the defendant's vehicle have to Mr. O'Keefe's mitochondrial DNA profile?
So it's the 95% confidence, 99.985% of the population. So the majority of the population could be excluded. However, with John O'Keefe and his maternal relatives, they could not.
Thank you, sir. I have nothing further on.
Mr. Jackson?
Good morning, Mr. Miyasaka.
Good morning.
Couple of quick questions. Mitochondrial DNA, as you've explained, is different than autosomal DNA in pretty significant ways, correct?
Correct.
What we think of as traditional nuclear DNA, that's autosomal DNA. That's the DNA that we derive from mom and dad, comes down to the child, correct?
Correct.
Mitochondrial DNA, by contrast, is simply the maternal line, excluding the dads, correct?
Correct.
So my mitochondrial DNA has nothing to do with my father, everything to do with my mother. Is that right?
Yeah, mitochondrial DNA gets inherited from the mom to child.
Okay. So a male like John O'Keefe, for instance, the known sample that you were working with, shares the exact same mitochondrial DNA as, for instance, his mother. Correct?
Correct. His mom and any other maternally related individuals.
You just took the words right out of my mouth. And that's my next question. Stop being smarter than me. It's going to be a tough task. It's also the exact same mitochondrial DNA for his grandmother, right?
Correct.
And let's move the lineage off the tree trunk and move it onto branches. For instance, if his mother had 2 children, John and a sister, his sister would also have the exact same mitochondrial DNA, correct?
Correct.
And now staying on that branch of the tree, going out to a leaf, if his sister had children, those children would have the exact same mitochondrial DNA.
Correct.
So another way of saying that, his maternal niece, his maternal nephew would have the identical mitochondrial DNA as John O'Keefe, correct?
Correct.
Okay. When you indicated that John O'Keefe is included in the population of those who match that profile, that does not mean that you're determining that the hair that you analyzed came from John O'Keefe, does it?
No, with mitochondrial DNA analysis, it's not unique to individual. Compared to traditional STRs or short-chain repeat, that could be unique to individual. But with mitochondrial DNA, it's not unique to individual, but more so a maternal lineage.
All right. So, Mr. Miyasako, very importantly, you're not sitting here saying that that hair belonged to John O'Keefe.
I'm saying that the hair sample on John O'Keefe cannot be excluded, as well as his maternal relatives.
So we're speaking in negatives. I want to speak in a positive. You are not saying that John O'Keefe, that hair belonged to John O'Keefe, are you? Yes or no?
Sustained.
Are you suggesting to these jurors that the hair that you analyzed belonged to John O'Keefe?
Sustained.
Are you telling the jurors, to a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, that the hair that you analyzed belonged to John O'Keefe?
I'll see it sidebar.
Sure.
There's got to be a way to ask it that it's proper. Because that's exactly what's going on. He's not telling them that. He can't be excluded. But it's not necessarily John's hair. It's somebody from his mother's side of the family. It could be Paul's. Not that he has a lot. It could be Paul's. It could be Kaylee's. It could be Patrick's. It could be his grandmother's. It could be anybody's hair. It could have been one of the kids' hair. Who knows? My throat's scratchy from where I choked on my potato skin this morning. But yeah, if they just match the mitochondrial DNA, it's from his mother's side. So not necessarily John.
Saying that the hair belonged to John O'Keefe, correct? That's not what you're saying.
What I'm saying is, based on the genetic data obtained from the hair sample and the genetic data obtained from the known reference sample of John O'Keefe, I could not exclude John O'Keefe as being a possible source of the hair sample. In addition, all maternally related individuals could not be excluded as being a source of the hair sample.
Another way of saying that, Mr. Misa, to a reasonable degree, I'm certain you cannot say hair belonged to John O'Keefe specifically. Yes or no?
No, with mitochondrial DNA, you can't
Okay.
say that it is per se an individual person. So it's more so the maternal line.
Because the hair could have come from his mom, it could have come from his maternal nephew, or anybody in his maternal line, correct?
Correct. If
Okay.
they also had access to that stuff, then yeah.
For instance, access to that stuff, meaning if his maternal nephew lived in a home with him, where the SUV was stored, it's just as reasonable if the hair came from him, correct?
Sustained.
Your analysis does not tell us when the hair got to where it was found, correct?
Correct.
Your analysis does not tell us how the hair got to where it was found, correct?
Correct.
And mitochondrial DNA does not reveal anything about the hair's color or age or texture, nothing like that.
Not on the analysis that we performed.
Okay. So for all you know, that hair could have been placed where it was found by somebody else.
Sustained.
You're not telling this jury how the hair got where it was ultimately found and recovered, correct?
Correct. Our testing is just based on the evidence provided to us and the comparisons done between the two different evidence.
And in short, you can't say that the hair specifically came from John O'Keefe either, can you?
With mitochondrial DNA, I can't say that it is specific to an individual.
Okay, including John O'Keefe.
In this instance, John O'Keefe's profile was consistent with the hair sample.
That's not what my question was, Mr. Miyasako. We can go round and round. I realize that you're saying it's consistent, but it's also consistent with his nephew, right?
Correct. I can't exclude maternal relatives because mitochondrial DNA is not specific to individual, but just the maternal line.
Right. So you're not saying it was John O'Keefe's hair?
I can't say whether it is, but the profile obtained from John O'Keefe is consistent with that hair sample.
You're not
But
saying it's John O'Keefe's
Mr. Jackson. Mr. Jackson. Let's move on.
The reason you can't say that it's John O'Keefe's hair is because it also matches everybody in his maternal line. That's what we're getting down to, correct?
yeah, with mitochondrial DNA, again, it's not unique to an individual, but their maternal lineage.
And if his maternal nephew lived in the same residence and had access to the same SUV, couldn't exclude him either, right?
Sustained.
So in short, Mr. Miyasako, you cannot tell this jury when the hair got to where it was, correct?
Sustained.
You can't tell this jury how the hair got to where it was found, correct?
Sustained.
And you certainly cannot tell the jury that the hair belonged to John, right?
Sustained.
I think we've got it. Thanks, Your Honor.
Mr. Lally, anything?
Yeah, Judy, I missed it.
So, Mr. Miyasako, including the MPOP, the statistics, and the confidence interval, what is your conclusion in reference to the comparative analysis from mitochondrial profiles from the hair sample from the rear quarter panel of the defendant's vehicle and the known standard of John O'Keefe?
Based on the genetic data obtained for the two different samples, I could not exclude John O'Keefe's known standards profile being consistent with the hair samples profile, and with 95% confidence, at least 99.895% of the population can be excluded as a source of the evidence.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further.
One final question, Your Honor. Do you also maintain that 95% confidence with his nephew?
Yeah, so again, with maternal
You can finish your
populations.
answer. Go.
With maternal populations, I can't exclude anybody maternally related to John O'Keefe as well.
Thank you very much, sir. You are all set. That was good. Even with all the objections. Who is doing it?
Who is the Commonwealth's next witness?
Commonwealth's next witness is Shannon Burgess.
See who? Oh, here we go. Here's the problem, people. Here's the problem, people. That whole hearing last week was about. Where is everybody today? Everybody's leaving. It's just boring DNA, boring experts. Commonwealth should be done this week. Approaching.
So you're gonna step up?
I'm not taking notes anymore. I'm so bored.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you shall give to the court and the jury in the matter now pending shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes,
Thank you. Have a seat.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Also found out that John's dad doesn't think Harry did.
All right, Mr. Brennan, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jurors, spell your last name for the court reporter?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Shannon Burgess. Last name Burgess.
Him already. I know.
Mr. Burgess, what do you do for a profession?
Sure. So I'm a digital forensics examiner. So I investigate digital devices to see what evidence they may record or.
Oh Lord, y'all, you don't know how much that is music to my ears. Y'all don't know how good that sounds.
or hold.
Do you specialize in any type of forensic analysis?
Sure. So digital forensics is kind of a broad field, but I do specialize in vehicle forensics and cell phone forensics.
How long have you been a digital forensic analyst for?
Sure. So I've been a digital forensic analyst for approximately 10 years.
Before you were a digital forensic analyst, what type of work did you do?
Sure. So before I was a digital forensics analyst, I was working in the automotive manufacturing field, specifically related to automotive presses and industrial robotics.
Experience in digital forensic. Did you receive any certifications in digital forensics?
I did. I've received several certifications, one being what's called GIAC, Advanced Smartphone Forensics. Another from Celebrat, a company named Celebrat, in Certified Mobile Examiner. And then certifications from Magnet Forensics as well.
Is Magnet a company that also includes Axiom?
Yes, Magnet is a company that produces the software known as Axiom.
In addition to your certifications, how many hours of specialized training approximately have you had in digital forensics?
Sure. So approximately, over the last 10 years, I've had around 700 hours of training, including courses and conference attendance in digital forensics.
In addition to your training and your study, do you have experience over the 10 years? Have you involved yourself in many cases regarding forensics found from a motor vehicle?
Yes, I have.
Can you give a general estimate of how many cases you've worked on?
Oh, not off the top of my head, I couldn't, but it's been numerous.
You said that you specialize in mobile phones and digital forensics in motor vehicles.
That is correct.
Do you teach seminars on those issues?
I do. I teach seminars and presentations specifically in those disciplines.
Who are some of the audiences that you teach to?
Sure. So it ranges from attorneys to engineers that specialize in accident reconstruction to police agencies such as Interpol, which is a global police organization.
Have you testified as an expert in digital forensics in court before?
Yes, I have.
Have you ever testified as an expert regarding digital forensics in state courts?
Oh my
Yes,
God,
I
it
have.
does look like
Could you share with us those state courts?
Sure. So those state courts would be Oregon, Texas, Arkansas, New Mexico, and those would be the ones in the last 4 years that I can recall off the top of my head.
Have you testified as an expert in digital forensics in federal courts before?
No, just in state courts.
Have you testified in state courts in civil cases?
Yes, I have.
Have you testified for plaintiffs in civil cases?
I have testified for plaintiffs and defense in civil cases.
And have you testified in criminal cases before?
I have testified in criminal cases as well.
Have you testified for the prosecution before?
I have testified for the prosecution as well as the defense.
Does the data change regardless of who you testify for?
No, it does not.
Where are you presently employed, Mr. Burgess?
Sure. So I'm presently employed with a company known as Aperture, and I'm located in their Dallas office.
Is Aperture a company that has offices outside of Texas?
Sure. So Aperture is a company across the country. So they've got a number of locations and offices, and they offer a number of service lines specifically related to forensics.
Do you ever work on different cases or scenarios with people in the Texas office?
Yes, I do. Sure. Go ahead.
Do you ever work with other employees of Aperture outside of the Texas office?
Yes. So I do occasionally corroborate with other experts in the Texas offices as well as the other offices across the country.
In this case, was there another professional who worked with Aperture that was related to this case that you talked to?
There was.
And who is that?
That would be Dr. Judson Welcher.
Is Dr. Welcher's profession and job the same as yours?
No, it is not.
What's the difference between what you do and what Dr. Judd Welcher does?
Sure. So what I do is investigate digital devices that can range from cell phones to vehicle modules to computer systems. What Dr. Welcher does is specifically related to accident reconstruction and biomechanics.
So you are not an accident reconstruction engineer?
I am not.
You are focused on the data?
I am focused on the data.
Did you ever publish any writings or papers regarding the area of your expertise?
Sure. So I have published 2 papers, specifically one related to damaged devices, and that is referencing event data recorders, which is your black box or your airbag control module, and specifically related to developing proof of concepts, because a lot of times these modules will store data in different places on the module. Proof of concepts are ways to verify and validate where that data is stored, so you're not missing data.
So the first article that you wrote about damaged modules, was that peer reviewed?
It was.
And was it accepted?
It was accepted.
Could you tell us briefly what
Y'all see, that accent don't mean you're dumb. Just putting that out there. That accent don't mean you're dumb.
peer reviewed means?
Sure. So peer review is a process of your peers or colleagues reviewing your work and determining that it's valid.
Is peer-reviewed articles often relied upon by other experts in the field?
Yes, they are.
You said that the first article you mentioned had to do with damaged modules. Is that one of the areas specifically that you're going to talk to us about in this case?
Sure. So it is specifically one of the areas I'm going to talk about in this case. And to kind of go back a little bit, the idea of proof of concept applies not only to damaged modules, but also other vehicle modules such as infotainment and telematics modules.
I don't think we're at infotainment and telematics yet. So if we can just understand a little better, very basically, what is proof of concept in action? What does that mean?
Sure. So proof of concept is taking a vehicle module, for example. This is typically an unidentified vehicle module that other individuals have not looked at or verified what is recorded and where it is stored. So a proof of concept is taking exemplar modules and doing tests on those modules. So creating events that are recorded within the modules. A lot of times when those modules are damaged in vehicle crashes or if they're just unsupported by your forensic tools, you will have to go to what's called chip off
or chip swap forensics. That is specifically taking the chips off of the circuit board. So think of the hard drives from your computer, moving those hard drives to another module, a working module, to recover the data and validating that you've recovered all the data that you would expect to see.
Are there times and cases or studies where you need to recover data because it's not available to you through the traditional methods?
Yes, many times.
Let me ask you, you said there was a second article. What was that second peer review article about?
Sure. So that second peer-reviewed article was specifically related to mobile forensics, specifically iPhones, and how they track your device interactions as well as speed and location data and validating how accurate that data was.
In addition to talking to us about damaged modules, as you're going to do in this case, are you also going to talk to us about the timing information from mobile phones?
Yes, I am.
When did you first become involved in the study of this case?
So I first became involved in this case around October of 2024.
When you became involved in October of 2024, were you in receipt of any information or reports or documents to look at?
Yes. So I did receive some raw data as well as some photographs from the vehicle in this case.
When you say raw data from the vehicle, what does that mean specifically?
Sure. So again, when you take these chips or hard drives off of these modules, you can read those chips individually and recover any type of data that is recorded on those chips. So when I reference raw data, that is looking at that data in hexadecimal format, which is as close to binary data, which is what computers use to store data in, as you would want to get when reviewing this type of data.
When you receive data, does that presume it's already been downloaded by somebody?
Yes, that is correct.
In addition to looking at the data, you receive photographs. Do you know where those photographs came from?
I do not know specifically who those photographs came from, but I do know those photographs came from an initial download attempt on those modules.
You said there was an initial download attempt. When you looked at the information you received, did you learn whether or not there was an attempt prior to your involvement in October 2024 to obtain data from the modules or the so-called black box in the Lexus vehicle?
Yes. So there was an attempt to download data from the modules in the vehicle.
Did you understand whether or not there was a chip-off process whether anybody attempted to take the computer chips off the computer boards and learn or download the data?
Yes, there was an attempt to remove various chips off of the boards and read those chips individually.
Did you have an opportunity to read any reports submitted regarding that earlier process that occurred before you even got involved?
Not before I got involved. Well, sorry. Yes, I was able to read a report from a individual known as AG Speak about that process, that initial process.
Did you learn who conducted, the name of the person that actually conducted the original process before you were involved in this case?
Yes, I understand that person to be Miss Maggie Gaffney.
You know, generally when Miss Gaffney engaged in trying to download information from the computer boards of the defendant's car?
Yeah, if I can recall correctly, that was around December of 2023.
And in your review of materials and study materials, did you receive additional material?
Well, the only thing you missed was the DNA guide said that the hair on the car matched John O'Keefe's mitochondrial DNA, which comes from the mom's side of the family. So AJ tried to point out that it could have come from his nephew, just as much as it could have been from him, and that his nephew lived in the house where the car was stored. But Lally kept objecting, and Bev kept sustaining them. But I think the jury got the point.
Materials.
Yes, I did receive additional crash reports, just detailing the events of the night.
When you say crash reports, what does that mean?
So that's going to be crash reports from the Massachusetts State Police.
Is a crash report just a written report or is it data?
No, it's just a report, no data.
Did you receive any other reports from any other individuals or experts?
No, not at that time.
Did you later, over time, receive any more additional information during your studies?
Yes, I believe so. And let me reference my report just so I don't misspeak.
Let me ask for the court's permission before you
Yes.
do that.
Sure, sorry.
Yes.
So I did, again, I reviewed a vehicle forensics report by AG Speak. I reviewed documentation that was identified to me as evidence review, a prior testimony of Trooper Garino, and I reviewed some surveillance videos as well as a report by Mr.
When did you receive any study or reports? You remember?
I do not remember exactly.
Was it recently, some time ago?
It would have been some time ago, probably late 2024 after we got involved.
Last year?
Yes.
And how about Mr. Whiffin's reports?
Mr. Whiffin's report, I believe I received in January of this year.
In the video, do you know when you received any video?
It would have been this year. I don't remember the exact dates.
Was it last month, months ago?
No, probably around January or February as well. Well, I take that back. It would have been early January, maybe late December.
I ask you just generally so we have a general perspective on this. When you began your study, was there something specifically that you were looking for?
There was. So specifically what we're looking for when we do a chip off on these vehicle modules, we're expecting to see one of two things. User data in a raw hexadecimal format or a file system.
Events that you were focused on relative to the data in the defendant's Lexus?
Sure. So there were specific events that we were looking for specifically. That would be including time-stamped ignition-on events or power-on events, as well as other data.
Did you have any information or understanding that there were text events that you would have focused on?
Yes, I did have an understanding of events in a airbag control module.
How many text stream events were you focused on?
2 text stream events.
Could you just generally characterize those 2 events?
Sure. So one event has been identified as a 3-point turn maneuver, and the other has been identified as a backing maneuver.
Now, the studies of those events, is that the role of the accident reconstructionist?
Yes, it is.
So then what was your role related to, your specific role related to those 2 characterized events, the 3-point turn event and the backing maneuver event?
Sure. So within that text stream data, those events are documented with what's called a time count. So that's going to be a running timer from the time the vehicle powers on or the ignition comes on. So that counter will count seconds incrementally. And specifically, the focus was looking for any time-stamped data that would offer when that power-on event occurred.
Did you put together a PowerPoint presentation regarding your assessment of some of this case?
Yes, I did.
May I approach?
Yes.
Handing you a package, you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
And what is that?
That is my PowerPoint presentation that I prepared.
You just turn a few pages so
Sure.
you can look and see if that accurately reflects the presentation you put together.
Yes, it appears so.
And does this reflect some of your study of this case?
It does reflect some of the study in this case.
Is it an entire comprehensive study of everything that you learned, or is it an overview?
No, it is an overview.
For the course permission, I would mark this for identification. I intend to use this for the course permission as a chalk.
Okay, so we'll mark it for identification.
Exhibit SS for identification.
May I proceed, Your Honor?
Yes.
Sir, you to teach a little bit about the motor vehicle. Is there one computer in an airport?
Well, there could be hundreds with very specific functions to what they're what they're meant to do.
Tell us a little bit about why there's a need or why many computers are used in a single vehicle.
Sure. So there's so many functions within your modern vehicle now. It is a computer that operates your radio, your head unit. So that's going to be your obviously your radio, any type of built-in navigations, Android Auto, Apple CarPlay. There's what's called a telematics module. That's going to be what actually allows the vehicle to communicate with the internet services. So when you look at, if you've got an app that can track your vehicle or unlock your doors, that's being allowed through that telematics module.
With the court's permission, I'd like to have Ms. Gilman show page 3 of the PowerPoint.
Okay. Is there any objection, Mr. Lassie?
No objection, Your Honor. Thank you.
Sir, on your PowerPoint page 3, you have a chalk or diagram of a car. You may have a pointer in front of you if it helps.
Sure.
If you could direct your attention to the TV to your right. Could you explain to us what this diagram shows us?
Sure. So this is a diagram that just shows, a small number of modules that you can find in specifically the Lexus in this case. Again, what we're focused on and looking at is the infotainment module and the telematics module in orange. For example, there are other modules known as the body control module and the airbag control module, the engine control module, which runs your vehicle. In addition to that, there are other modules that operate your door locks and unlocks, your windows, and various other functions.
When you use the word module, is that the same thing as a separate computer or is it different somehow?
Yeah, so that using parlance, module would be referring to a separate computer within the vehicle.
Do all of these separate computers in the vehicle connect with each other?
They do. So all of these modules are connected to one another, and they do communicate with each other.
The information that would be commonly referred to as black box or information that captures some of an event, where would that be in this diagram?
Sure. So the black box would be in the airbag control module.
And then as far as the radio system, you shared with us, that's the infotainment module?
Yes. So the radio system is going to be, that data is going to be stored within the infotainment module.
In the telematics module, specifically, what are we looking for there?
Sure. So the telematics module, again, is a module that allows communication with internet services. So if you've got an app on your phone that you can unlock or lock your doors, that's the telematics module is allowing that function to occur.
Do all make and model cars have the same setup as this diagram?
No, they do not. It will vary.
Does it vary from car maker to car maker?
It does. It varies from car maker to car maker. It varies from trim level as well.
Could two different cars from the same manufacturer, same style, could they have different components in those cars?
They could, yes.
Why is that?
Sure. So during the manufacturing phase, depending on cost and other things, manufacturers will source these modules from different third-party manufacturers. So one vehicle may have a module from, for instance, LG Electronics. One may have a module from Denso. And depending on how those individual manufacturers implement that software and hardware, they may record and store different types of data.
A 2022 Lexus, and then you see another Lexus, whether it's 2022, 2023. Would you be able to say you've seen it, you've already done it, or do you have to individually look at each car?
Sure. So you would typically look at, and to correct, it's a 2021 Lexus. But if you want to understand what may be stored in a subject module, you would look at, take an exemplar vehicle and conduct some testing to determine what is being recorded and how that data is being recorded.
You mentioned that you were looking for time information or power on information regarding two events.
Correct.
Can we characterize those events as text stream events?
Yes, we can.
Do people sometimes refer to them as triggering events?
Objection, Your Honor.
Sustain.
Are they often or sometimes refer to something other than a tech stream event?
They can be referred to as other things besides tech stream events.
Can you give us an example of what else they may be referred to as?
Sure. So that would be triggering events
Why
created when there's a trigger, and those trigger thresholds will vary and could be for a number of different reasons.
when a tech stream event happens, or a so-called triggering event, data.
Sure. So when tech stream event happens, orders or data types that are recorded for a specific time frame.
In this case, how many of those events were you looking at?
Just one.
When you mentioned time, I want to have you explain to us a little bit about time. You said there's a running clock. Can you explain that a little more detail and simply what that means?
Sure. So in what's recorded within the tech stream events, I'll refer to as a running clock. Essentially what it is when the vehicle is powered on, this clock starts to run and it counts seconds from power on. So when you press the ignition on, this clock starts. And when there is a tech stream event that occurs within that cycle or within that ignition on, that is recorded as the time that trigger occurred.
Does that give an actual time, like when you look at your watch or you look at your cell phone?
It does not give an actual time, yeah.
Your Honor, pardon the interruption. The chalk remains on the screen.
Okay, are you still reviewing the chalk?
We can take it down if it pleases Attorney Alisi.
Thank you.
So you were getting back to the clock. You said it's like a running clock. Is that like a stopwatch?
Yeah, that could be referred to as a stopwatch.
Where is that running clock kept in the data?
Sure. So that running clock is kept within the airbag control module.
Is that the so-called black box part of the data?
That is correct.
With the running clock, how do you determine the actual time as it relates to, say, for example, your digital watch or your iPhone or another clock?
Sure. So in that instance, you would need to have an event that occurs, such as a power on event with a timestamp to reference back that running clock.
When you got involved in this case and you looked at the information that was previously downloaded by Ms. Gaffney, was there any data regarding power on, power off to mark that time?
From the initial download, there was not.
When you involved yourself in your study, what was your primary focus as far as information you wanted to get and why?
Sure. So primary focus when I initially got brought on was to look at the modules and see if there's any data that was not recovered. And then specifically, again, looking at any time-stamped data that may have been recorded within the modules.
You talked about the differences in modules. In your PowerPoint, did you provide a couple of photographs of the modules so we can see what you're talking about?
Yes, I did.
With the court's permission, I'd like to put on page 4 of the PowerPoint.
Okay.
No objection, Your Honor.
Yep.
Could you explain to us the photograph on the left and then the photograph on the right?
Sure. So the photograph on the left is kind of a top-down view of the infotainment module from the Lexus. Photograph on the right is a top-down view of the telematics module from the Lexus.
Are these modules from this specific car, or is this a general photograph of a car and how it works?
These modules are from this specific vehicle.
From the car you studied?
Correct.
On the left infotainment module, you have different manufacturers. Why is that?
Sure. So again, these modules are not manufactured by Lexus or Toyota themselves. They are manufactured by third parties that are providing these modules to the car manufacturer. And these are just some examples of what we have seen within these specific vehicles and what type of manufacturers provide modules for these vehicles.
If we could turn to page 5, please.
Vehicles.
When
That's where my dad is.
you looked at the data that was provided in this case, did you draft a report?
Yes, I did.
Your initial impressions Can you share with us what your initial impressions were?
Sure. So initial impressions were that data was missed from the initial download.
What type of data do you think was missed, or did you conclude was missed from the initial download?
Sure. So that would be, essentially all of the user data was missed during that initial download.
How did you conclude or come to the opinion that data was missed on the initial download?
Sure. So reviewing the raw data, you can see that what we would expect to find, which would be things like contacts or from devices or device connections or time-stamped data, was not there in those initial downloads.
When you first looked at the data and you came to the conclusion that there was missing data, did you have a working theory on what you thought or how you thought the information was missing?
Sure. So I did have a working theory initially of why the data was missing.
And what was your initial theory?
Sure. So if, I'll reference kind of to the slide a little bit.
We can take that down if you'd like.
Sure. So, sorry, can you repeat the question?
When you had your initial theory of data missing, what was it based on?
Sure. So the initial theory was based on two things. Either one of two things initially I thought could have happened, and that was a bad or partial read of the chips, or it could be that the data-bearing chip that we are looking for was overlooked and not downloaded.
When your first thoughts were that this was a partial read of chips, was there anything about the chips when you looked at them that you concluded or came to an opinion on?
Sure. So initially, when I was reviewing the data and reviewing the part numbers on the chips, we can see what, how much storage is on each chip. And that can kind of get complicated, but essentially what we're looking at is we're looking at data stored as either bits or bytes. That is represented as a capital B or a small lowercase b. So initially, upon reviewing the data and with the assumption that a competent examiner would not miss a chip or a device or data bearing chip on the board, I misinterpreted and wrote a lowercase or a capital B when I should have wrote a lowercase b in my notes, which led me to believe that there was a partial download of those initial chips.
Now, as a forensic analyst, do you rest on your initial impressions or do you go through a continued process?
No, so I do not. So just like the scientific method, if you have a working theory, you then review and research to either prove or disprove that theory.
And did you engage in that scientific process in working theory?
I did.
And how soon after you wrote the report did you realize there may be another source of the material?
Sure. So, I'll clarify a little bit. That initial was not a report; it was just a protocol that was proposed. But I believe that there was a supplemental protocol written within a week or two of the initial protocol.
And when you used the scientific method and studied the theory that you had, what did you decide or what did you learn?
Sure. So upon further review and research, I discovered that there was a SD card or a micro SD card that was on the circuit boards of one of the modules that was never looked at.
Now, you weren't present at the original process?
That is correct.
When you looked at the modules, those computer boards, did you notice anything about them that happened during the original process?
Sure. So I did notice during the chip off process, what you do to take these chips off is you apply heat to them. So that essentially liquefies the solder, which is a low temperature metal that connects the chips to the board and makes those connections so the board can communicate. And there was some damage caused from that initial chip off.
And again, why would you take the chips off a board if they're already attached? Why would you need to do that?
Sure. So, typically if you think about downloading data from your cell phone, you have a USB port on your cell phone case with vehicle modules. So you have to remove these chips from, and then you've got programmers or data from these chips.
Did you have a chance to study the boards that were already accessed during an earlier chip-off process before you got involved?
Yes, I did have an opportunity to study some photographs of the boards.
Could we have page 14, please, Ms. Gilman?
The objection, Mr. List.
No objection, Your Honor, thank you.
Okay, if we could turn to page 15. Tell us what this is, please.
Sure. So this is the infotainment module that you saw earlier. This is just two photographs during the disassembly process of taking that module apart.
Could you zoom in on the right photograph, Ms. Gilman? Okay, if that's the best we can do, that's fine right there. Could you share with us a little bit about what this is?
Sure. So this is how I received the modules when we took a secondary look at them. Essentially, this is if you see from the right photographs, there's many boards that are contained within this infotainment module. This specific board that we're looking at here on the right is the board where they removed chips from. What we're looking at is the circuit board itself, as well as two components that were previously removed during that initial download attempt.
So if you can't read the chips on the board, if you remove them, is there a tool that you can use to actually read the individual chips in isolation?
Yes. So there is tools, various tools that you can use to read those chips and read the data from those chips.
If we could have 16, please. Can you tell us what you see here?
Initially removed from the board during that first download attempt. I've documented an additional chip that was still on the board that was not identified during that initial download on this side of the circuit board. And then I've got photographs matching the chip and where its placement was initially on the circuit board.
Could we have page 17, please? And what do we see there?
Sure. So this is some of the damage that occurred to the circuit board itself during the initial chip off download attempt.
Do you have a pointer on the stand?
I do, yes.
Could you show us with the left photograph, point out what you mean by damage?
Sure. So right here on the left part, you've got these two highlighted blocks. So what this is if you remember back to the last slide, the larger chip that we were looking at, this is directly underneath that. So when you're removing that larger chip, what you're doing is you're applying heat to it. If you apply too much heat during that chip off process, the underside of the board will actually heat up and you'll have chips fall off of the underside of the board. So that's what's occurred here on the left side. On the right side, as you heat up these chips, if you're not careful, as you pick them up off the board, you can displace other components, and that is what you see right here in this highlighted box here. It is a small passive component that has been displaced where it should be.
What is the risk of damaging components when they're taking off the board during a chip off?
Sure. So the risk of that is causing damage that could be internally that we can't see. And if you want to put the chips back on the board and assemble everything back together, it may not work appropriately.
In addition to seeing the damage with your eyes on these photographs, do you look at data when you engage in the analysis, whether or not you think data is missing?
Yes, I do.
Could we have page 6, please? Could you tell us what this is?
Sure. So this is just some examples of what user data would look like and what we're expecting to see when we look at the raw data from the chips that are removed from the board. So there's two ways to look at data, and one way is looking at the file system, similar to the file system you would see on your computer when you store documents. Same thing exists in vehicle modules. There are instances, though, where you cannot rebuild the complete file system, and you've got to actually look at the raw data in hexadecimal format. So that hex data, the bottom photograph or screenshot, is what that would look like in hexadecimal format.
When you looked at the data that was provided during the original chip-off or process and was produced by Ms. Gaffney, were you able to, at this point, identify any date and time or power on or off information that you were looking for?
No, I was not.
You mentioned that you went beyond the original data from the testing and you discovered something on the board.
Yes, that's correct.
Could we have page 18, please? Tell us what you found.
Sure. So this is a micro SD card that I identified on the subject vehicle and later validated that existed on an exemplar vehicle as well.
Could you use the pointer?
Sure.
I know there's a red square, but I want you to describe for us what you saw and what that meant to you.
Sure. So if you look at this side of the circuit board, obviously this is a zoomed in view. But what you see is this kind of underneath the SD card is a silver casing. That is the slot that the SD card would go into, similar to the slot you would have on your computer. And again, what we're looking at is the SD card, just both sides, top and bottom.
You had mentioned earlier that when you looked at the data, you believed that there was data missing. When you found this SD card and discovered this, what did you conclude?
Sure. So at that point, I concluded that the data that we were missing was most likely stored on this SD card.
Did it appear whether or not this SD card had ever been removed from the board?
No, it did not.
Did you receive any information that this SD card was ever studied or downloaded?
No, I did not.
Could you just take this board and put it back in the car and use software to read it?
There are instances where you can do that. For this vehicle, though, we could not.
Why couldn't you?
Sure. So there are commercial forensic tools that are available for vehicle systems. One of those tools is referred to, or is called Burla. Burla is a company that writes hardware and software, or develops hardware and software that pulls data from vehicles in a user-friendly way, so that non-technical people can gain access to this data without having to go through the steps that we did in this case.
When you discovered this SD card and had your hypothesis that there may be data on it, did you have concerns about simply removing the SD card and trying to read it?
Yeah. So anytime you see an SD card on a vehicle module, in the past, there's research and there's documentation of finding these SD cards. Most of the time, they are what's called Command 42 locked. So what that means is there's a lock put in place. So if you take this SD card out, plug it into your computer is not going to recognize it. So the SD card is actually looking for a passcode from the V itself to unlock it and allow access to the data.
What if you don't have that passcode?
Sure. So when you don't have that passcode, there are ways around that lock. Specifically, if we look at the left photo, you can see there's a lighter shaded black area on the SD card. What that is it's a protective covering that is covering some what's known as technological pads, and those pads allow access to reading the data and bypassing that lock.
Is gaining access to an SD card on a board like this a simple process?
It is not a simple process.
Are there a lot of advanced studies on it?
There are advanced studies on it, and it is a in-depth process to recover this data and interpret it.
Are there any concerns that you had about spoiling or destroying the data if you tried to access the SD card without a passcode?
No, not that I'm aware of. There's no documentation or research that suggests you would spoliate or lose data by bypassing that lock.
Were you concerned at all in trying to get the information from the SD card about the process of it?
Yes, I was.
Why?
To get data from this SD card, we suspected that the user data that we were expecting was on this card. So in order to validate that user data existed on this card, we processed and went through a set of testing
What's an exemplar vehicle mean?
Sure. So an exemplar vehicle is a 2021 Lexus LX570 that is as close to the same trim and features that the subject vehicle was.
We could take that down now, Ms. Gilman. Why did you want a similar but very separate vehicle to do testing before you tried to crack into the SD card?
Sure. So, it's kind of multiple reasons. First, to validate that the process that we're theorizing to recover data is viable. But also, this is a vehicle that there's no documentation on as far as, the data that is stored and the data, how it's recorded and what it, means. So as well as, being able to validate that process, we also wanted to do testing and create some of our own data and known data sets on a vehicle, so that when we got the data, we were able to look at it and compare it to our known data sets, and we were able to validate and correctly interpret what that data means.
Mr. Brennan, why don't we take our break right now?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right, folks, we'll take a 15, 20-minute break.
All rise, please. Jurors, close your notebooks. Follow me.
You are muted.
Why was I muted? I didn't mute myself. StreamYard muted me. Let me start over. What we're going to do now, do you guys remember the burned and battered trial? Linda Sturmer, Michigan, I think. Today is her sentencing. So we're going to leave Karen Reed for just a little while, and we are going to go to Michigan for Linda Sturmer's sentencing. I really, really want to hear the victim impact statements. I want to hear her son's. Didn't she have a daughter that was on her side? Or am I confusing her with Melody Ferris? I really want to hear the victim impact statements, though. Oh, that's right. Both her daughters were on her side, and the 3 sons weren't. So I really want to hear the victim impact statements and the sentence. So we're going to go over there and do that. And then when that's over, we're going to come back over here and pick up where we left off. So it's set to redirect. We're not going to miss any. Yeah, that's exactly my thought. Go do this one live, and then we can fast forward through all the breaks and everything on Karen Reed. That's exactly my thought. So it should redirect you to Linda Sturmer. So I will see you guys over there in a few minutes. Bye.